All right, welcome back, Spartans, to yet another one of our craft conversations. We're very pleased today to be joined with one of our own San Jose State faculty members, Dan Brook. He's been teaching since 2005 in the sociology department, and he's been widely published on a large number of topics in many different areas and in many different publications. So we're so happy that he could join us today and chat a little bit about all of the work that he's done. So let's launch right into it.
Well, thanks for having me here.
Oh, thank you. How does your teaching in the sociology department inform the writing that you do? What sort of topics are you most drawn to writing about and why?
Well, sociology is such an amazing field. We study culture and we study the interactions between individuals and other people and individuals and institutions and organizations and individuals and our whole society. So what that also means is that just about anything can be sociological. And I love that. So it deeply informs what I do because I love looking at connections and patterns and interactions and relationships. And the other thing about sociology is that when sociology was invented, it was invented as a two-step process, unlike most fields. And the first step is to learn as much as we can about society or aspects of society. But then the second step is where we really do sociology. And that's where we try to take what we learn to reform society, to make the world a better place. So that's how just about everything I do is sociological. So whether I'm writing about racism and anti-racism, or women refugees, or smoking, or vegetarianism and veganism. These are all sociological concepts. Or when I write against the death penalty, or ending homelessness, or raising the minimum wage, these are all just inherently sociological topics.
Great. And you've spent a lot of time sort of thinking about and writing about these topics in a way that is sort of an activism platform. And how do you feel that's sort of informed by your background as a sociologist? Or do you?
Yeah, I do. I am an activist, and I'm an activist sometimes in the streets, and sometimes I need a rhyme in the broadsheets, on paper, And actually, I do like, going out and joining protests, but I actually think I'm probably more effective when I write because I have those skills. And so I try to use it that way. And I'm conscious about that. I want to do that. That's how I want to insert myself into the world because another world is possible. And I want to be, one of the midwives to bring it forth.
It's a great way of looking at things. We need more positivity in our lives.
Indeed, yes. And that's why we dance in the streets when we protest too.
That's very true. So you're also an academic who's managed to balance this teaching career with publishing rather prolifically. I was looking at your CV and I was blown away by the number of publications that you've had and the books that you worked on and the editing work and everything else that you've done. So what's your secret to keeping yourself motivated to write more? Do you write daily? Do you work with co-authors? You tend to focus on one project at a time, or are you constantly juggling back and forth between things? What keeps your fire going as you work?
Well, one secret is just to be concise. So short articles and short routines and rituals are good for some people, and I don't disparage them. It's just not for me or my personality. So I don't write every day. I don't write a certain time of the day. I don't necessarily write in the same place or location. I don't have a special pen or keyboard or anything like that. I do it when it moves me. In a way, so like if I were to draw for you, you would see what a really bad artist I am. But as a writer, I can feel like an artist, and it feels that way because I just get ideas in my head, and they rattle around in there. And occasionally I say, I don't want to do that, so I'm not going to write on that. And sometimes they go away, and sometimes they keep rattling around. And if they rattle around my head too long, the only way to get them out is to write about them. So that's what I do. So I have written with co-authors a few times, and that's fine. But mostly I do it on my own. I juggle multiple projects at the same time, not because it's better, only because I'm not disciplined enough to do one at a time. Because actually I went to a forum at UC Berkeley several years ago where they had 4 Nobel Prize winners on stage. It was fascinating. But the one takeaway for now is that they asked them, just slightly tongue-in-cheek, so how do you win a Nobel Prize? And the answer, which is applicable to what we're talking about, is they all basically said some version of this. They said, you have to pick a project that's big enough that it's difficult and new, that'll interest people, but not something that's impossible to do. And then you have to really do that and mostly not do anything else. And if you really do that and mostly not do anything else on a big, important project for several years, then they said you have a chance, in their case, of winning a Nobel Prize, or in this case, of being more successful. So, and they're probably right, because they did win Nobel Prizes and they seemed very smart and entertaining. But I can't work on one project. It just doesn't work for me. So I'm putting that out there because I think what they're suggesting is better if it fits your personality. But if it doesn't fit your personality, then you need to write in a way that's consistent with yourself. And so that's what I do. And so even when I'm deep into something, I sometimes get another thought about something else. When I go update something, it's like I just have multiple jigsaw puzzles going on with different numbers of pieces in each, and they're all over the place. And that's okay.
Well, but I think that's great for everybody to hear, that, you know, there's no one right way, to use a bad pun, a right way to write.
That's right.
And it's all about finding your system. You don't find it anything to be precious in terms of, you know, an item, but you have sort of those ideas that you pay attention to in a really clear way.
So I literally I've had some short articles that I've written from beginning to end in a day. I have another project. I actually don't know when I started, but it was probably about 20 or so years ago. And you know, it moves along periodically. And eventually it'll get out there. It's just not out there now. And it's oh, you know, some come to the fore and that one is always on the back burner. That's okay though.
And you and I have worked together on getting some of your work out there in terms of pitching to different places and sort of seeing what editors are interested in, specifically with op-eds. And so my question to you—
invaluable.
Oh, well, thank you. My question to you is, how much rejection have you dealt with being a writer, and how do you deal with that?
Well, I don't know if it's thick skin or whatever people want to call it. I don't mind rejection. In fact, I want more of it, but let me explain why. I really do. Because most of what I get from agents, publishers, newspapers, when I send out op-eds, is nothing. I get silence. And so when they actually write me back to say, well, thanks for sending it, we can't use your piece and wish you the best of luck placing it elsewhere, I know it's a form letter, but I'm grateful to get it. And I thank them for their rejection notice that they actually wrote me back. So I'm so old school that way. I expect people to actually write me back when I write them. And so, yeah, so I want more rejection. No, I don't mind rejection. You know, it's a competitive world. Each of them have their own interests. I mean, I don't necessarily open all my email. I don't like everything I read. I don't there are some things I'm interested in reading, but it's not the right topic for today, or it's too long for what I'm doing these days. And I don't read it even in a favorite magazine of mine. So I don't take it personally at all. And I just keep trying. And I think that's one of the things that makes me different and why you saw so many things on my CV. It's because I don't take no for an answer. I just send it to someone else. And in one particular rare case that I can think of, I didn't take no from the editor that rejected me. I wrote him back. And he published it. That I don't expect that to happen again, but it did happen once, and so it gives me hope. I did hit the literary lotto, so to speak, because I don't think people normally get rejection letters turned around.
It happens more often than you think.
Oh, well, okay, good to know.
I've been through rounds of rejections with my editor, and not to get too far off topic, but if I disagreed with what my editor wanted to publish and I came back to him and said, I want to make this change, most of the time I would win.
Oh, no, that I've done. I'm talking about an editor who rejected my piece, though.
Sometimes it happens too. He would reject my pitches and I'd say, I know this is going to be good, so let me send it to you and I'll change your.
Great. Oh, now you're creating a monster. I'm going to argue with more editors.
Well, hopefully we'll still keep it.
And then another thing is, I remember, and there's a book, it's one of those I think it was Chicken Soup for the Writer's Soul, where I read that, like an author I like, Jack London, I think he got 500 rejections. And lots of other people, including the Chicken Soup people who couldn't get their book published. They first couldn't get an agent. Then they couldn't get a publisher. Then when they got it published, they couldn't get it picked up in lots of bookstores. People wouldn't read it. They couldn't get it reviewed in newspapers. So what's a rejection?
Oh, students, think about this. When you're struggling with a piece and you think, oh, this is terrible, I just got a bad grade on it. Well, maybe it just needs a little more revision. Maybe it needs another round. Maybe it needs another pair of eyes on it. And that could become something.
Maybe your professor was in a pissy mood.
One would hope not, but you never know.
Hey, you know what? It happens.
Writing's a process. So speaking of that process, I'm going to go on to our next question. How much does research play a role in the writing that you do? So when you start a draft, do you do the research first, or do you outline your ideas and then fill it in with the research as you go? Sort of, what's your methodology?
Well, first, I think all writing in one way or another involves cycles of thinking, researching, writing, editing, and not always in that order, and that's okay. I think, though, the more I've personally learned, the less I do research before I start writing. So when I think back to my student days, I didn't know as much. That made sense. And so I'd get an idea for something, but then I would have to mostly do some research before I could do any writing. But on, lots of topics that I'm, familiar with, that I've lectured on or I've read about, and then I think, oh, maybe I should write about it. So I've already done some of the research. I just didn't realize I was doing it. So nowadays on a lot of topics, I just start writing. And then I use research to corroborate, to make sure that I'm accurate. I use research to fill in the gaps and add more. I use research to, find maybe specific quotes or cite a certain thing. So that's my way.
Academics
over time, I'm not the same. None of us are the same selves that we were. It's true every second, really, but we don't see it on the seconds level. We more likely see it on the years level.
Yeah, I was going to say, in some ways, academics are like magpies. Like, we go through and we find things that interest us and we keep building those up. And then sort of see what comes out of those.
Yes.
I think that's sometimes what good academic writing can come from, just this collective breadth of knowledge. You never know where it's going to come in handy, but it's useful to know it.
For sure.
Yeah. So that also sort of goes to my next question. You've worked in a lot of different genres, from photography to textbooks to op-eds to editing. What's your favorite part of the writing project or the process? And what types of projects are your favorites to work on?
I think there's 2 points that are my favorites in a writing project. And the first, I guess, is when I get that spark, that that idea. And when I do, there's nothing that can keep me from pursuing it. And so I'm thinking about it, and and then when I start actually typing or scribbling, depends on where I am or what's going on, I love those first ideas. What some juicy bit, even if I don't have a full sentence. It could be a word, a phrase, a sentence. It could be sometimes it's a quote or an author, but just getting that down, I find really exciting. And then there's, the drudgery of writing the piece. It's sometimes hard work. Sometimes it flows more than others, but it takes efforts. Crafting, it's organizing, it's selecting, it's all that stuff. So then when there's a critical mass, we'll say, there's still more that needs to be written. There might even be more research to be done, but we've like crested the summit, so to speak, and we're on the other side. And then it's just a matter of, for me, it feels like filling in pieces. And here again, I use the metaphor of the jigsaw puzzle. I already have, the whole outline, the perimeter, and I have some of the shapes inside, and now it's just filling in the pieces. And I have no idea why I use this metaphor, because I don't like doing jigsaw puzzles, so I don't do them. I write. I'm not going to waste my time with jigsaw puzzles. There's articles to write. There's op-eds to publish.
Well, I mean, there's always reading to be done. There's always things to be explored. But yeah. Do you ever find yourself, even with all these initial sparks, are there times where you get stuck with no ideas, or have you ever had to try to work through some of those?
I don't know that I have, because I'm not on a deadline where I have to write. So I only write when I want to and when it's a topic I want to write about. So I haven't personally had that problem, because if I'm not in a mood to write, if I don't have an idea, I don't write. Or I just write other stuff. I also write a lot of haiku. I've written several thousand haiku, and I sort of document my life in haiku. So there's always another, a haiku just captures a moment in time. And with relatively few words, it creates, ideally, one or more images for people. So I can write anytime I feel like it, can write a haiku, because it's always another moment. So I never have a problem with that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it also just keeps your mind active and thinking about how to distill thoughts into sort of short, pithy phrasing too.
Exactly, yes. I sometimes like the constraints, and that's why I not always, but often do, traditional Western haiku of 575. I can't remember his name right this second, but there was a famous, very progressive lawyer who, after he retired, he started writing sonnets. And he said he loved that it created this constraint, that it had to be a certain number of lines and a certain number of syllables. And that's why I like haiku too. It gives me a certain constraint, but within that constraint, I have infinite freedom. And to me, that's also a sociological lesson about society, because society constrains us in all sorts of ways. And the more we're aware of those constraints, the more we can successfully navigate them. In the same way that I think it was the Dalai Lama who said, you really have to know the rules really well to be able to know which ones to break when necessary.
And that's a good thing to know too about grammar rules.
For sure.
It's always an important consideration, especially coming from the Writing Center. I'm putting on my Writing Center hat.
And I agree, as a 100W instructor as well, that, grammar is really important because the conventions of our society, but if you could make something sound better and be clearer and be more forceful writing by breaking a grammatical rule, please break it.
Absolutely. And you heard it from the Writing Center too.
Oh yeah, good.
All right. So thinking about, advice that people hear all the time, or that things that people are always considering, what sort of suggestions would you give to a student of yours who's struggling to fall in love with writing? Or how do you start to encourage those writers in your class that might just be first starting out? They're on their first publication quest. Like, what sort of encouragement would you give them?
It's great if you can love something, if you can love someone, if you can love writing. But the truth is, if you don't, then you don't. You know how it feels, the difference between loving and not loving someone or something. But if you still want to love writing but don't, you can act as if you love writing. Part of sociology is understanding that we all play roles in different ways. And so if you play the role of someone who loves writing and really inhabit that role as an actor, as if that were your job, you'll find it remarkable, because you may not feel it in your heart at the moment, but your character will love writing, and therefore your character will act a certain way. People talk about writer's block. I don't believe in writer's block. I don't think it's a real thing. I don't think it exists. I think it's an excuse for people not to write. And most people who claim to have writer's block, what do they then go do? They do something which they find easier and or more enjoyable. And in that sense, the solution to writer's block is not to do something easier or more enjoyable, to either do the same thing or do something less pleasant, less enjoyable, and more difficult. And then guess what happens? We start writing. Some people suggest, if you have writer's block, then write something else. And if you don't know what to write, start writing, I don't know what to write. This is boring. I have writer's block. And if you do that long enough, that's going to become so miserable, probably like in 40 seconds, that you'll start actually writing what you, quote unquote, should be writing. And then the other simple things, or deceptively simple, is read more, because you learn from other writers and you learn other styles and phraseologies and topics, and it's always good to know more about anything. If you know more about anything, you can potentially use it for anything else. And so that's read more. And the other is write more, whatever it is, right? I mean, you can read the side of your cereal box, and you can also practice writing copy for the side of your cereal box, or you can write a satire side of a cereal box, or anything else, because reading and writing are really the keys. And then being conscious about your topic and your world, being deliberate and thoughtful, thinking about what your angle is, what your edge is, how you want to contribute. And you don't need to have fully thought out answers to these, but just pushing yourself in that direction and asking those types of questions. How do you want to contribute to this field? I mean, a lot has been written on the topic of race and racism. And it would be easy for some people to say, I can't do it, and there's nothing left to write. And I can assure you, there's a lot left to write. And in fact, if you're thinking about the topic, then we need you to contribute to that. If you agree that Black Lives Matter, and you could write something about it, that's another way to contribute to the Black Lives Matter movement, by writing, because only you can be you. And that means nobody else, literally nobody else, can write what you write. And it doesn't mean that you'll be able to, well, no, you can't. You can't write Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, because she wrote it. And she's Michelle Alexander. But she also can't write whatever it is that you can write on the subject. So yeah, go and do it.
That's great advice. And I hope that as students and as faculty members and the wider SJSU community listens to this, that we all sort of think about, like, what role can we play? How can we contribute? Because each of our voices is so important to be able to share.
Yes. We
And
should
write,
speak out, we should write. If it suits you, you should protest, you should donate, you should volunteer. And that's whether it's for Black Lives Matter or anything else that makes potentially our world a better place to live in. I mean, we're a storytelling species. Tell your stories. Get them out there. Entertain people, inspire people, and change the world at the same time. Well, I could not think of a better way to end this interview. Thank you for giving us those inspiring words and for sharing your great knowledge about the writing life and the work that you've done over the many years of your publication process. So it's been a pleasure, and I appreciate you very much, and I appreciate the Writing Center. So I'm really happy to be here.
Oh, well, thank you. So I hope everyone continues to tune in and watch these great videos. We have some more interviews lined up for this coming semester, and keep an eye out for all of the future talks that we'll be having in these craft conversations. Thank you so much, Dan.
Thanks.